May 25, 1982, Argentina's Revolution Day. But in the icy waters of the South Atlantic, it was the 53rd day of a brutal conflict. The Falklands War. For Argentina, this was not just war. It was a fight for the Malvinas. On their national day, 4 A-4B Skyhawks prepared for a desperate patriotic mission. Their targets were British warships, patrolling the cold expanse northwest of the islands. These ships formed a dangerous radar picket, a lonely line of defense for the British fleet. But the British ships were in a precarious position. For 3 long days, they had been on constant patrol, far from support, weary and battered by the sea. The Argentinian pilots flew with terrifying disadvantages. No radar warning, no chaff for defense. Just outdated planes, unguided bombs, and sheer determination. The British ships were designed to shoot down planes. The Argentinian pilots were desperate to sink them. It was a deadly gamble, and the day was just beginning. The Argentinian pilots were from Grupo 5 de Casa. Their call signs were Vulcano and Zeus. They weren't just soldiers. They were patriots on what many considered a one-way trip. Their A-4B Skyhawks were loaded with bombs, but lacked fuel for a long fight. Their only chance of survival was to fly dangerously low, wave hopping just meters above the icy water. Their targets? The British radar picket ships, HMS Coventry and HMS Broadsword. These 2 ships were the bodyguards for the main fleet, and their job was to die before the carriers did. HMS Coventry was a modern Type 42 destroyer, a gatekeeper. Its main job was to protect the carriers with its long-range Sea Dart missiles. It was a shield designed to take the first hit. In command was Captain David Hart Dyke. He and his crew were exhausted. They were the bait placed in Bomb Alley, deliberately drawing enemy fire away from the main fleet. Coventry's partner, HMS Broadsword, provided close-range defense with its Seawolf missiles. Together, they were a deadly missile trap designed to kill jets from high and low. Suddenly, the Argentinian pilots saw them. 2 gray smudges on the horizon. The British picket. The lead pilots, Vulcano and Zeus Flight, split up, preparing to attack from different directions. At that exact moment, inside HMS Coventry's dark operations room, a shout. Air attack warning. Red! Bearing 090. The low-flying Skyhawks had finally appeared on their radar. Coventry reacted instantly. The ship turned hard, bringing its main weapon to bear. Sea Dart, locked! The long-range missile roared off its launcher, a streak of fire against the gray sky, racing towards the jets. The Argentinian pilots saw the smoke trail. The Sea Dart was screaming towards them. With no electronic warnings, they relied on pure instinct, banking hard, diving even lower, trying to break the missile's lock. But the missile failed. The Coventry's radar, confused by the low-flying jets and the Broadsword sailing too close, lost its target. The $40 million Sea Dart simply crashed into the ocean. Now it was HMS Broadsword's turn. Seawolf, locked! Her short-range missile system tracked the incoming jets. But as the jets crossed in front of each other, the system got confused and simply shut down. The British defense systems had failed. Now it was down to raw firepower. Oerlikon guns, open fire! Both ships erupted in a storm of 20mm cannon fire, a last-ditch effort. The Skyhawks didn't flinch. They flew straight through the wall of exploding shells and red tracer fire. They were now inside the kill zone. Too close to miss. The first pilot, Vulcano Flight, released his bombs over Broadsword, but he was too low, too fast. The bombs skipped off the water like stones, and one of them hit Broadsword's side but failed to explode. The first attack had failed, but right behind them was Zeus Flight. The second pair of Skyhawks. They saw Broadsword was damaged. They saw Coventry, and they locked on. HMS Coventry tried to lock its Sea Dart missiles, but the Skyhawks were too low, flying inside the radar clutter from the waves. The multi-million-dollar missiles were useless. Again, the British sailors turned to their cannons. Tracers filled the air, but the 2 Skyhawks didn't flinch. They flew directly at Coventry, a final desperate charge. The Skyhawks were now inside the ship's gun range. Just 10 seconds from impact. The pilots pulled up slightly, steadied their aim, and released their bombs. It was too late for Coventry. The first bomb struck the ship's side, punching through the hull. A fatal blow deep inside the ship, below the operations room. Seconds later, the other two bombs hit. They ripped through the deck, plunging deep into the engine room before exploding. A devastating, crippling blow. Inside the ship, it was chaos. The bombs had torn the heart out of the Coventry. The operations room was hit. Power failed instantly, plunging the ship into darkness. Within seconds, thick black smoke filled the passageways. The ship, mortally wounded, immediately began to tilt heavily to its port side. She was dying, fast. On the bridge, the captain realized the ship was lost. There was no saving her. The terrible final order was given. Abandon ship. Abandon ship. Now it was a race for survival. Sailors, many injured, scrambled onto the tilted deck. They had to jump into the freezing 4°C water of the South Atlantic. Within minutes, HMS Coventry was listing at an impossible angle. The fires were raging, the smoke so thick it blocked out the sky. The proud destroyer was finished. Now it was a race for survival. Sailors, many injured, scrambled onto the tilted deck. They had to jump into the freezing 4°C water of the South Atlantic. Nearby, HMS Broadsword, though damaged, raced to help. They moved in, throwing ropes and scrambling nets down to the desperate survivors. It was a race against the cold. The water was lethal. Hypothermia could kill in minutes. Broadsword's crew worked frantically, pulling their comrades one by one from the icy grip of the Atlantic. And then, just 20 minutes after the first bomb hit, the battle was over. HMS Coventry, a proud symbol of the Royal Navy, rolled over completely and vanished beneath the waves.
Don't miss our incredible war stories. Subscribe for more. And for the full mission, watch the full video on our channel. Link in the description.
On the deck of Broadsword, the survivors were in shock. Cold, wet, and defeated. They had lost their ship and 19 of their shipmates in the span of 20 minutes. Party sailors paid the ultimate price. 170 were saved. The sinking was a disaster, a brutal loss for the Royal Navy, but a tactical victory for the determined Argentinian pilots. But this devastating loss, this moment of Argentinian triumph, did not change the course of the war. The main British fleet was untouched. The landings at San Carlos would continue. Back at their airbase, the pilots returned, exhausted, running on fumes, but victorious. They had flown an impossible mission, and succeeded. In Argentina, the news was electric. The sinking of a modern British destroyer was a massive propaganda victory. It was proof that the Malvinas could be defended. For the pilots, like Captain Pablo Carballo, it was a moment of national pride, but also a somber one. They knew the cost of war, and they knew the British would return. For the British, the loss was a wake-up call. It brutally exposed the weakness of their missile systems. The missile trap had failed because the radars couldn't handle two ships operating so close together. The Type 42 destroyer, designed for open ocean combat against Soviet bombers, proved terribly vulnerable to low-flying, determined pilots. It was a hard lesson, learned in blood. Years later, the survivors of HMS Coventry and the Argentinian pilots who sank her would meet, not as enemies, but as veterans, sharing a mutual respect born from that brutal day. The order to abandon ship was given, but for many it was impossible. The first bomb's explosion had trapped men in the operations room and sealed their fate in an instant. Deep in the engine room, survivors of the second hit found themselves in a dark, flooded nightmare. The blast had torn the ship open. The icy Atlantic was pouring in. As the ship listed, everything became an obstacle. Ladders became vertical. Decks became walls. Men were forced to climb out of the ship, fighting gravity and the rising smoke. On the deck, launching the life rafts was a nightmare. The ship's angle was so steep, the heavy rafts had to be cut free, sliding uncontrollably into the icy water below. The captain was the last to leave the bridge. He looked at his ship, then climbed out the window, sliding down the hull. He was no longer a captain, just another survivor. In the freezing water, sailors linked arms, forming circles to share body heat, fighting the lethal cold. They looked back one last time, as their ship slipped away forever. The Argentinian pilots flew their A4 Skyhawks at their absolute limit. These were old 1950s era jets, with no modern warning systems. They were flying blind. Their biggest challenge wasn't just the British. It was fuel. They had to fly from the mainland, attack, and return. A journey so long they had zero room for error and zero fuel for a dogfight. To survive, they flew just meters above the waves, hiding from radar. This was incredibly dangerous. One mistake, one rogue wave, and the plane would be lost instantly. The Argentinian bombs were simple, unguided 1,000-pound dumb bombs. There was no laser guidance, no fire and forget. The pilots had to manually aim their jets at the ship while being shot at. This was a tactic from World War II, not 1982. It required immense bravery. To fly at your target, ignoring the missiles and cannons until the last possible second. The pilots knew the British missiles, Sea Dart and Sea Wolf, were their biggest threat. Their entire plan, their only hope, was that flying too low would confuse the British radar. They were betting their lives on it. The British missile trap was a good idea. On paper, Coventry Sea Dart would shoot down high jets. Broadsword Sea Wolf would shoot down low jets. But the Argentinians flew too low. The Sea Wolf missile system on Broadsword, the one that should have saved them, had a fatal flaw. When the two jets, Volcano Flight, attacked, they crossed paths. The system's computer couldn't track both. It just gave up in the bombs. The three 1,000-pound bombs that hit Coventry were devastating. The ship was only a destroyer. It was never designed to absorb that much punishment, especially not deep in its engine rooms. Today, HMS Coventry lies at the bottom of the South Atlantic. It is a designated war grave, a final, silent resting place for the 19 men who went down with her. Above, on the surface, the only marker is the endless cold ocean. But back in Britain and in Argentina, the memories of May 25th are still raw and unforgettable. It was a battle of technology and of courage, a battle where 1980s missiles were defeated by 1950s jets, and where sheer desperate determination proved to be the deciding factor. The 19 men lost on HMS Coventry were not just statistics. They were sons, husbands, and fathers. Their names are now etched on memorials, a permanent reminder of the price of war. Every year, survivors and families gather to remember. They throw poppies into the sea, one for each man who never came home. The Argentinians also paid a heavy price. Throughout the war, many pilots were lost. Both sides were united in their sacrifice, fighting for a land thousands of miles from home. The captain of the Coventry survived. He would later write about the incredible bravery of his crew and the impossible, terrifying situation they were placed in. A savage and lonely battle. The Argentinian pilots were hailed as heroes, but they remained humble, stressing they were just soldiers doing their duty, armed with outdated planes and little more than raw courage. The sinking of HMS Coventry was a defining moment, a brutal lesson in the limits of technology and the unbound, terrifying power of human determination. In the end, the battle was also decided by sheer, dumb luck. The bomb that hit Broadsword, the one that should have crippled her, failed to explode. A matter of milliseconds in the fuse timing, and the courage of the Argentinian pilots, flying directly into a wall of missile and cannon fire with no defenses, proved that the human element is still the most powerful weapon in war. For Coventry, there was no luck. Just a 20-minute battle, a failed radar, and 19 lives lost, forever tied to the icy waters of the South Atlantic. The loss of HMS Coventry was a shock to the British public, a brutal reminder that this distant war was both very real and very deadly. For Argentina, it was a display of incredible bravery, a moment when outdated planes, flown with pure, desperate courage, achieved an impossible victory at a terrible cost. A story of courage, failure, and sacrifice on both sides, in the lonely, unforgiving waters of the South Atlantic.
Don't miss our incredible war stories. Subscribe for more. And for the full mission, watch the full video on our channel, link in the description.